So we have a little exercise, wanting to be time efficient, that involves the introduction, but will also tell us something about your churches and something about you. There is this tool that is being used around the church. It's, about 10 years?
Oh, yeah.
But ebbing and flowing, and it's called appreciative inquiry. If you're Canadian or British, it's appreciative inquiry. So if you want to sound like very cool, say appreciative inquiry, and people will think that you're a very intelligent person, generally. It's a tool from Pittsburgh and the University of Pittsburgh, and you can spend anywhere between $2,000 and $10,000 getting trained to do this. And so what I did, I was asked actually a couple months ago to do some planning on the method with a Lutheran synod. So I did it all and put it on one handout, and we're going to do it in 3 minutes. So this is the sort of speed dating form of appreciative inquiry. And all it is, it's not that mystical. What it is that the sense is that instead of looking at ourselves or our churches or organizations we belong to, and using the part of our brain that, sort of picks the scab, right? Looks at what's wrong at it and focusing on that. What we're supposed to be doing if we want to create a new paradigm is to look at what are those aspects of our common life that make us feel most alive, most present. When did this place work? When did it sing, right? And it could be any time in the historical memory of the place. And you can appreciate, if you do this kind of a process, hi, Jeannie. You do this kind of a process with lots of people that's multi-generational, there's a lot of storytelling that goes into the method. And so that's, I think Pittsburgh quantified what those of us in the church knew about long time ago. You gather people and you help them tell their stories. That builds community, that builds hope, right? Okay. And that's why they get all the money, and we Christians, we don't have any money. But we do have this one little piece of paper Sheryl did, I'll give you later, that tells you. But we tell stories and it builds hope. Hope is a social resource. It's not just existential. It is learned and it's built in community based on relationship. Okay. And that's all the hope people that are studying it tell you that now. Another thing we knew all along, but people are doing fairly well off of. So what I want you to do is I'll give you a few minutes to think about the question, but then we'll go around as you introduce yourself and introduce your church or your organization, wherever you want to zone in for this afternoon for the time we have. But remembering your entire experience at your church, when were you the most alive, the most motivated, and the most excited about your involvement? Okay. What made it exciting? When did you feel most alive in that community? And 1 or 2 sentences. Okay. And I'll give you 2 minutes to think about it. Because if we overthink, that's not good either. Okay, I'll start modeling the behavior. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in the process. I'm Sheryl Kujawa-Holbrook. I'm on the faculty at Bloy House. I'm on the faculty of CST as well, CLU, CGU, C places. And I'm a member of St. Mark's Upland, which I like very much. And of course, my most exciting moment, only been there 3 years since we moved here. My most exciting movement always changes. But my most recent one, being alive, was sitting there in the Easter Vigil and having my 7-year-old daughter show her father around the prayer book. And she knew the pages where everything was and would say, Daddy, these are the pages. My husband has a meditation practice, sort of vaguely, raised by nomadic wolves, so vaguely Christian. I mean, he's got some, he knows isolated Bible stories and things like that. But she knew she was taking him through the thing like this. And I went, yes, that's formation. Mm-hmm. That's formation. So that's my moment. You want to go next to the other teacher?
Absolutely. I'll be delighted to go next. I'll also say a little bit more about myself when I do some remarks in a couple of minutes. My name is Bob Honeychurch. I'm the professor of church leadership here at Bloy House, as well as the interim rector at All Saints by the Sea up in Santa Barbara.
Yay.
Yay. Two of my colleagues in ministry are over here. That's right. And Cheryl's only been in her congregation for about 3 years. I've only been in mine for about 6 months. So I'm an even newer member of my faith community than she of hers. And so my I don't have to dig so far back to find a memory. And yet my memory takes me back to Easter as well, to Easter Sunday. And for those of you who are aware of some of the history of All Saints by the Sea, they've had a difficult last year and a half, and have experienced a lot of the cross side of the cross and resurrection story. And Easter Sunday we did a baptism with what has to be the poster child for babies to get baptized. This absolutely adorable little girl who somehow with 500 people in the room was able to engage each one of them personally, I think. And it was that moment of transformation for me because knowing the hard times that All Saints has been through in the last year, and coming into that story a little later than the folks who really had to experience the hard part of that, it was for me a visible but an experiential moment of knowing that after the cross there's a resurrection, and there was that sense in that congregation at that moment as well, and it was an exciting time. Thank you. It's a real joy to be with you all this afternoon. A little bit of the format. I'm going to make some kind of opening remarks, and Cheryl's going to make some opening remarks, and then we're going to really engage us in some conversation, just to give you sort of an idea of how the next hour will come together here. It's a real privilege and an honor to have been asked by Sylvia to work with Sheryl on this lecture. I'm looking at my phone here, Hope and Action, Abundant Small Churches. That's what it's called here. So
it's our book, Bob.
In case you're wondering why we're here, that's right.
It's our book, Bob.
Look at that. There's a funny thing. I've had a chance to work with Sheryl in a couple.
We were children.
Since we were children. That's right.
Sylvia was a child.
Not only since before we had children, but since we were children themselves. We started working with Sheryl 25 years ago.
Early 80s.
Early 80s, close to 30 years ago maybe.
And we were the young people then.
we were the children at the time, and in some ways I follow in Cheryl's footsteps in that I spent 4 years on the staff at the Episcopal Church Center, many years after Sheryl had been there, but in that capacity, which I was in, as I say, for 4 years up until last August, I was the missioner for Congregational Vitality, which meant that I oversaw the work of building and maintaining healthy churches for the Episcopal Church across the church. And in that capacity, it was just an incredible gift to me to be able to be involved in some amazing conversations. I tell people that really wasn't the job I was hired to do, however. That between the time that I took the position and actually began, the title changed, the position description changed, and the location of my office changed. I was originally hired to be the missioner for small churches, based out of Omaha, Nebraska. And in God's good grace, the world changed. Some configuration had happened at the church center, which allowed for some new possibilities to arise. And I ended up being the missioner for Congregational Vitality based out of Los Angeles, which in many ways was an absolute gift to not only me, but to us. That's how Sylvia ended up here at Bloy House, for instance. But much of my work for 4 years really was around dealing with small churches. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the nature of small churches and what they are and who they are. And Cheryl's going to do some opening stuff, and then we're going to open it up. But often the question is asked, what is a small church? And the answer to that question really varies. It varies by locale. It varies by denomination. It varies by one's history. If you're a Roman Catholic, a small church would be probably a parish that had less than 1,000 families. 1,000 families. You'd be a small church. On the other hand, if you were a Quaker, you went to a Society of Friends meeting, you would regularly go to a meeting that might have 3 or 4 people. And that wouldn't seem small at all. So small is a very relative term depending on one's experience. Certainly in the Episcopal Church, the rule of thumb, if you will, in sort of trying to fairly broadly lump congregations into categories would be that a small church would be a congregation that would have an average weekend attendance of 75 or less. And so you kind of use that as a rule of thumb, and that's kind of the lens through which I'll be doing a little bit of talking here for a couple of minutes. But even then, that requires a bit of explanation. There are about 6,800 Episcopal churches, 6,800 Episcopal churches across the country. And if you lined them all up from the biggest to the smallest in terms of average Sunday attendance, and tried to figure out where the middle of the line was, what's the median average Sunday attendance, half or bigger, half or smaller. In the Episcopal Church, the median average Sunday attendance is 64. 64 people on a typical Sunday in 3,400 churches, 64 or less in 3,400 Episcopal churches. So if you bump that up to 75, you're well over 60% of Episcopal churches would be considered small churches by that definition. Okay? So we are really, as Episcopalians, a denomination of small churches. And there are really then 2 primary reasons why there are so many small Episcopal churches. I mean, number one, it's undeniable that the Episcopal Church is shrinking. When I was in seminary in the early 80s, I was told that on average, 2 to 3% of the U.S. population considered themselves Episcopalians. That's what we were told. So in our siloed mentality of the 80s, when you could presuppose that everybody was a Christian, and when you thought everybody chose their church based on brand loyalty, it was assumed then that if you lived in a town that even only had 10,000 people, well, you'd have 200 or 300 eligible Episcopalians. And therefore, you could comfortably sustain a congregation. It's the mindset, at least, of the early 80s. Now, a bit of a reality check. The population of the United States in 2012, last year, was 314 million. That's the population of the U.S. Meanwhile, the number of Episcopalians in the year 2012 dipped for the first time in over 100 years below 2 million. Okay? Which actually then means that Episcopalians make up 0.6% of the U.S. population. And that's people who identify as Episcopalians. That's not people who go to church. Okay? So we are a very small denomination in a rapidly growing culture. And frankly, we are getting smaller. Now, truth be told, all major Christian denominations are getting smaller. Episcopalians, United Methodists, Roman Catholics, the most rapidly declining denomination right now is the Southern Baptists. That it is simply a cultural phenomenon that churches are becoming less and less a part of the cultural fabric of our time here in the United States. And not only are we getting smaller, but brand loyalty is simply a thing of the past. That is to say, I don't go to an Episcopal church because my parents went to an Episcopal church, or even because I went to an Episcopal church 10 years ago in the last town I lived in. That simply is not the world in which we live anymore. That's one reason that Episcopal churches are getting smaller. But in reality, the other significant reason that there are a lot of small Episcopal churches is that new congregations in the 21st century are necessarily, by design, small churches. Nobody is starting mega churches these days. They are a product of the 80s and 90s. People today are starting house churches, storefront churches, club churches, alternative worship communities within bigger churches. But the coin of the realm in terms of establishing faith communities in the 21st century is, as I say, by design, establishing small faith-based communities. And so small churches are not only a reality, but they're going to continue to be a reality, not only for the Episcopal Church, I think, but for the Christian church as a whole, certainly in our culture today. So then what does leadership look like in small churches in the 21st century? Well, with apologies to George Herbert, that 17th century poet who wrote The Country Parson, and with some
But he died in 3 years anyway.
But he died in 3 years of that in his first cure. Shows what parish life does to you in England.
Consumption.
That's right. With somewhat less apologies to Jan Karen. She's the one who wrote the Mitford series.
Yeah.
Father Tim and the book club. I mean, the book that became the reading material for Episcopal book clubs all across the country, and we all sort of took the cure on the Mitford series. And with apologies to that wonderful, successful BBC series, The Vicar of Dibley, the reality of the church in the 21st century is that the one church, one priest model is dead. And it ain't coming back anytime soon. The village square church is no more. Now, some of those realities are economic. The cost of maintaining that relationship of a full-time seminary-trained, paid pastor is enormous. And that number continues to go up as the overall sort of base of financial resources in a congregation continues to go down. But economic resources are just one of the reasons. I mean, I think an even more important reason that one priest, one church model is no longer is that it's simply not a viable model for the 21st century. It is simply not a viable leadership way to understand how faith communities can be organized. It doesn't just mean, however, that to change the model means that now we just have to make our volunteer lay people do all the stuff that the clergy used to do. That's simply taking an old model and trying to move it forward into a different era. Rather, it means we need to do things differently as communities of faith. A quick story. One of the questions that was asked of me many times as I was in my sort of early young adult years, certainly as I was looking toward ordination, was the standard question that was asked by parish groups or commissions on ministry or standing committees. Well, when were you called into the ministry? And I got to tell you, I had my little stock answer, and I could talk about growing up as an acolyte, and I could talk about all those wonderful transformative experiences I had at church camp that were somehow preparing me for ministry. But what I've come to understand is that the question, however well-founded it might have been or well-intended it might have been, was simply the wrong question. I can tell you exactly the day that I was called into ministry. Some people get the lightning bolt kind of thing. Some people comes on gradually. I can tell you it was April 14th, 1957. And I was 17 days old. And I was being held over the font at St. John's Episcopal Church in Butte, Montana. Now, I don't remember that day. And most of the people who were there don't remember that day if they're still alive. And the church didn't have the language in 1957 to remember that day. But that day, more than any other day in my life, was the day that I was called into the ministry. I had to come to that understanding over time. That's not what I've held all my life. But I've come to understand that is my only primary call to ministry. So then what's ordination? Well, ordination is simply a subset of my real call to ministry. I mean, one of the questions one of the statements that I can say I make regularly, some of you have been in my classes here, and I know Sylvia says something similar, because she's told me, is that ordination does not equal a paid job in the Episcopal Church, you know? And for those who are sort of aligning those two in their minds, I'm sorry to say you will be sorely disappointed. It is the way it is. But that's not what ministry is all about, is ordination. Survey after survey indicates that a growing percentage of the population, both within the U.S. and around the world, describes himself as being, by one definition or another, spiritual but not religious. You probably heard that phrase. In fact, a Pew Research Center recently released a study in which they titled Nuns on the Rise, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S, yes, as though it's sort of a flying nun reenactment en masse. In that article, they indicate that for the first time since they've been doing this kind of statistical gathering, 1/5 of the US public and fully 1/3 of adults under the age of 30 are religiously unaffiliated. They're not even culturally affiliated with the faith community. They are totally unaffiliated. And although that study doesn't break down its numbers on a state-by-state average, they do talk about the West as being significantly higher than the national average in that percentage. Now, as a religious insider, as one who is overly steeped in this church culture, I used to scoff at those folks as being little more than shallow, self-centered wanderers who are simply looking for the next trend to hang their heart on for the moment. But you know, as the number of those nuns who often describe themselves as spiritual but not religious has swelled, they started to creep into my world. They started to creep into my family, into my circle of friends, into my neighborhood, and yes, even into my church. Until they could no longer be this disembodied mass of humanity that I could simply caricature and dismiss. But instead they had real names and real faces and real needs. So now I've come to the point in my life that I view the spiritual but not religious among us as some of our greatest teachers. You see, I've come to understand that we live in a world filled with people who are deeply concerned about spiritual issues. Yeah. The problem is they come to us looking for God, and we give them the church. Dave's heard me say this before. They come to us looking for some way to make some sense out of the chaos in their lives. We give them a list of committees they can join when they walk in the door. They come to us looking for some kind of deep, genuine, transformative community experience. And we give them a pledge card or a time and talent survey or a spiritual gifts inventory so that they can serve us, the church. Too often it seems those spiritual but not religious find themselves encountering the church as a place which might best be described as religious but not spiritual. That is, I think, the challenge for our day. To be a vital, small church today means to engage the world as it is. Not as it once was, not as we wish it could be, but as it really is. It means that we're going to have to do things differently than we did in the past. It's going to mean that we have to develop different understanding of leadership than we did in the past. Not just because we can't afford the old model, but because the old model doesn't work anymore. So what does it mean to be the church? What does it mean to be the church in Boston this week?
Yeah, exactly.
What does it mean to be the church in West Texas this week? What does it mean to be the church in Rancho Santa Margarita this week? That's a little bit about what we're going to be talking about in the next hour. Okay. Thanks.
My background, Bob talked about a little bit. I was at the Episcopal Church Center for 10 years. I was in the education unit. I was also National Youth Coordinator. So I really see a lot of what I've always done and been interested in doing is about leadership and about evoking a potential, and what does that mean about what we're doing here and what does that mean in terms of the life of the church. So I guess most of the people I've always worked with are people that are some way don't see themselves as mainstream members of the church, but they're interested and they're somewhere on the margins. When we put this together for General Convention, we talked about different, it's mandated, wasn't it? You have to do, of course, this is what it was, being true Episcopalians, this is what we were told to do, and then this is what we did do. Any rule can be changed. And so we were supposed to, what's mandated is a small church growth strategies handbook. But it isn't a recipe, really. And so what we had some energy about doing is about looking at these places where there really is hope and where there is abundance and where there seems to be energy, despite all different size places. I think probably the smallest place that I talked to at 14 people, I think. And so what is that about? Okay. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about what I learned, and we'll pass the books around so that you can, because some of you will start salivating when you see a book in front of you, and then I won't be able, you won't be able to listen to me. So this way you can have that. This is some of the things I learned. I started when we did introductions on one of them. One is that I was confirmed in my belief that hope is a social resource. It's not only an existential emotion or feeling. It is what happens. It is what occurs. It's an energy that happens in a relationship between people when they're in a particular place, and they believe too that they can have some kind of impact over their environment. That they can do something in their community, they can do something in this church, that they have a capacity to do things for the good. And that's hope. And it's and people looking at it now put together quantum physics, they put together scripture and all that, but to me it's now a social resource. It isn't simply an aspiration. It is something that we do and we make happen. And in these places, these tiny, tiny places that have these hopeful stories, and as Bob said, there's lots of things, it's not hard to find things not to be hopeful about, There's a 19-year-old in Boston that is just injured 176 people and killed 3, right? So it's not hard to find those things. But it is part of agency. It's a part of the power of my leadership and the work we do within congregations to be the type of people that help evoke hope, help preach about hope, help talk about hope. Because, and see, everything good comes back. Hope and power, that's what Dr. King always said love was about. Hope and power. And when we look at these places, that's what the leadership needs. This is what these leaders do differently, or to a greater degree than the leaders of a more convalescent kind of style, right? They, until they bore themselves to tears, preach and teach and talk about and run their meetings. This happens on all levels. This isn't simply about clergy. This is about how we run the meetings. It's on who's the vestry. It's who's in charge. Are practical theologians that help people see hope within a situation. And they also help people make the connections with their capacity, so they know the people, this place isn't dependent on me. We have the energy here to address this situation. And how do you do that? So there's this synergy that happens in these places. And so when you talk to these people, they say, well, actually what I do is actually very simple. I do the same thing over and over and over again. But that I think that that system of sort of incarnating hope, to me, as a practical theologian, that's what practical theology is about now. It is about how to help people see that through stories, through events, through what is happening, through the music, through whatever it is that you're doing, and help people feel that they have power in their situation. There isn't somebody out there, this is that big church hallucination thing, someone out there is getting them. It's usually the diocese or in other forms of polity. You can have a synod after you can have a diocese after you can have archdiocese out of you can, conference after you. But, that idea that these small places get, and so it makes them sort of hunker down, but it's flipping that and saying, well, no, actually what happens here, we have control of this destiny. Mm-hmm. And we're not asked, the way vocation works is that God doesn't ask us to do things we don't have the capacity to do with the people in this room. So what are we going to do about it? And so that's one of the things I learned from, I was reemphasized with these people. I also learned that these folks have a real knack at realizing community. So much so that actually, over time, their churches get very porous. That where the community, outside community stops and where they start gets increasingly porous over time. So the question about who's a member and who isn't a member doesn't get so pronounced over time because they have people with different statuses, people with different issues. They come and go, and the people in the church accept that or whatever. But what it is they know how to realize community, and it isn't bounded. It's not a bounded set. It's in fact, it's like we have all these different groups, and that's cool. And they all, if they want to be part of us, that's fine. And we're willing to do that, and we're key to that. And I think the third thing, and see, I always keep things I learned down to 3, otherwise it gets too complicated, is they are really cool at, and they have over the time developed wisdom. And this is where all that stuff that being Episcopalian should actually, for those of us that are Episcopalian, help us, although our friends, the Methodist Church next door are good at this too, is that developing wisdom. That is, that they know that if we're going to meet the challenges of the world today, I am one of the first ones to be worried about, that was my story of my daughter, formation for children and youth. But if you're not doing anything with adults, you're not going to have anything for children and youth anyway. That the adult formation piece and the maturity of the spirituality within the adult population is critical. And that there are resources for people at all different stages of their journey, and how they feel connected to the greater whole is important. And that will happen through worship. I'm not talking about a lot of special stuff that you have to bring in all these people and stuff. I mean, how does your worship support that kind of maturity? How does, the EFM, which supports that kind of maturity. But those are the resource people for doing that. So the developing wisdom through through worship, through education, through those kinds of things, and being very clear that it's not, the adult resource isn't sort of leveled off at a certain place is critical. They know that, the adult, and then somehow when the adults have that imagination captured, then the kids and the youth are going to be fine. I mean, there's going to be something there for them. But we can't give young people something we don't have. It's just not available. So they know that. They know that, and they have that resource with them. So that's, I think, what I learned. Hope and power go together, social resource. Realize community, and what that actually means is the boundaries get more porous, not more solidified as you get to know each other. And that the third thing is developing wisdom. Because if you have a bunch of people with a fairly mature spiritual outlook, you can do tons of stuff. It's we spend so much time axe grinding, and often it's because of a spiritual depletion, or because people haven't been fed in a generation, right? And they're still doing the same jobs. It's not because they're bad human beings. It's that they are left with a spirituality that is much more appropriate to an adolescent than it is to an adult. And so that is part of the issue. So some greatest hits, so we don't take up all the time talking. Greatest hits, things I always love. My family hates it. I go on vacations and look at churches and things. And they go, oh, no, I wish I could just look at church.
Geek.
Yes, church geek. On the cover, one of my favorites, and this was small for Texas. I put that in parentheses. They only had 200 people when they started. They thought they were pitiful. This is outside of Houston, 27 miles, Pearland, Texas. And Jim, the rector, was a former oil company executive. And he said, these people were pitiful. And I said, I couldn't take it. So he said, what our motto needs to be, we are going to transform people on purpose. That's their motto. And they have a lot going on, but he said, his first sermon was about how the whole image he has of the church is that it's really rather a mausoleum. And maybe instead of that being a mausoleum, we need to be a bus station. We need to be about moving things around. We need to be about having the whole of the humanity here. So things they did is like, nobody sold pumpkins for Halloween in the whole town. So they developed a pumpkin patch. 20,000 people in the fall go through their facility because of these pumpkins. And everyone says, well, that's the pumpkin church, right? And everybody knows about them. And that's it. They have this thing about Andy to Go. Twice a year, they have alternative service weekend. And they have one, you can have they give baskets with, bread and wine, a leaflet of like a 20-minute service. And you can go with the group that's having it under the stars. You can go have your service with an ice cream social. You can have it with brunch. He says, I'm going to, these people say, I believe these people say, Sunday isn't a good time for everybody, Sunday morning. So twice a year, they have like 10 alternative services, and they give, there's a leader, and they have the basket, and they have it all publicized, and people go to all these different kinds of places. And he said, it's a small group activity as well then. It builds community because, the older people want to do something in the afternoon. They don't want to get up early either, but they're destined to be 8 o'clock people, so they feel they have to, right? Who else is going to be an 8 o'clock person if they're not there? But this gives them a chance to break out of those, I'm a 8 o'clock person, I'm a 9 o'clock person, and then they also do, it's called, the church has left the building. They have twice a year designated social justice projects around the town. They found some people who needed their house trailer painted. They had, for people who weren't as dexterous anymore, seniors, they had a not-for-profit company that stuffed envelopes for mailing. They had people that needed a well dug or whatever. You take your pick. Everybody starts at the service. They do, again, a 20-minute blessing, and they send everybody out to do some kind of work in the community twice a year. As a way of showing, he said, I want to show the community we're serious about this. And we're so serious that we're gonna take that amount of time during our week where we're all together and use it that way. Okay, and so
What is this church called, Cheryl?
it's just St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Pearland, Texas. The church has left the building. So that's a couple of them. Trinity Church, Lewiston, Maine has about 35 people, but they feed 300 people a day, and have a drop-in shelter. A little place in Hamilton, Texas, Diocese of Fort Worth. There's two on this list that we found in Fort Worth and Pittsburgh, both places where dioceses that have suffered a generation of clergy abuse, and places where churches, there was schism, so the bishop just left with a bunch of people. So this group of people in the Diocese of Fort Worth meet in a law office, and so they decided, well, we can't have our building anyway. The people that went to the Anglican something, whatever they call themselves, have it. So they've decided what we're going to be about instead is radical welcome. They were served by a retired priest and a retired deacon, maybe a couple times a month. And they have congregation of 14. They have a budget of $8,000. They have pledges of $13,000, and they have given away 90% of their income to community causes. And so that's what they do. St. Paul's, Hickman, Kentucky, I was looking for, we have a war. This is not always very popular to talk about, but we have a war going on. What about military personnel? What are people doing? A couple places, both here at San Clemente and also St. Paul's, Hickman in Kentucky, both of them, military personnel have a very hard time at the end of the month because the stipends are so bad, and they have a hard time with formula, they have a hard time with food. They get things like rent and stuff from the military, but any of those diapers, that kind of thing. And so this church in Hickman, Kentucky, adopted a Coast Guard ship because they're near a Coast Guard station. There's 30 people in the church and 17 people on the ship, right? But they've adopted it and they've managed to provide for those families when the ship is out and when it's the end of the month and they need more money. And places like San Clemente here equipped, like most of a base, their kids with back to school stuff. You know, they just got back to school stuff for people, and we're willing to do that. There's a neat place in Pittsburgh that knows a lot about special needs because they've also had a hard time in that diocese. One thing going around for places that have a charism for worship, there's a movement about having Sunday afternoon services for people with children that are autistic, that cannot take a lot of noise, jarring things. And what happens is those families then don't go to church because they're worried that everybody's going to get weirded out and the kids have to pace and that bothers people and they get shushed and all that kind of stuff. And so there's sort of a program for that, but they have it and they publicize it, and it's very ecumenical. They get people from all over the community because that's the only church that can accommodate their kids.
What's the name of that one?
This one is at St. Paul's, Pittsburgh, but if you send me an email, I can give you there's a booklet and stuff,
Right.
a curriculum, and I can send you that information. It's for Augsburger, autism, those kinds of places that need that kind of support. They also have a refuge service, they call it, for people who feel, in places where they have a lot of people who are demoralized because of sexual misconduct, for instance, in the Catholic Church. They have a refuge service for people that are sad because they're separated from their faith, but at the same time, they can't go back. They cannot go back. And so they have this a couple times a year. Lots of places. There's also grief services, for instance, people that have lost children. There's a couple who have lost children during the course of the year, so they always have a service around Christmas time. So it's, these kinds of, that is so, this it gave me hope just talking to these people because of some of the things that they did. And the last one I'll mention is that I thought was clever is St. Paul's in Marquette. There's so many, you'll get the book, you can read them, has a healing arts center that they found a lot of people interested in Marquette with, the Enneagram, with spirituality, exploring spirituality deeper, but it's a predominantly blue-collar town. There's not a lot of resources. The entire diocese of northern Michigan has 5 full-time clergy, that's it. So they put together a healing arts center where people they accumulated all the resources and coordinate them within the town and make them available to people in Enneagram workshops, yoga, that kind of stuff, so that we don't have that class bias in terms of being able to obtain some kind of spiritual assistance, that it's available in a much more sort of democratic package. And so that's what they did. So the process gave me hope. The other thing I learned, and this is an addendum to this, is that I think, and why appreciative inquiry or other processes are helpful, but it's part of hope that people are have an easier time journeying forward if they are able to see that there are parts of their past that go there as well. So places that have tried this, we're just going to separate off from whatever happened, or in fact, that actually impedes them from moving forward. All of these places, faced into sometimes very, very, very difficult situations, or they lost other buildings, or it burned down, or in one case, a mining company took the entire top of their mountain off. And that was how everybody was employed. Mm-hmm. But rather than pretend that didn't happen, they looked into that reality and went away because they said, that's still a piece of our history. It's just that we need to acknowledge that happened and then we have to go on. So that part of the healing was is ongoing for them and they know it. It's not something that is sort of magical. Mm-hmm. They don't do it. So.
Right. You've heard us talk quite a bit. We're going to shift that gear around now, that model around now, so that you all have a chance to engage one another in some conversations. So what we'd like to do, I'm just going to start with Kirby and kind of work our way around. I'm going to ask you to count off by 3s in just a moment, so that a group of, in this part of the room can be group number 1, group number 2, and group number 3. Just gather in 3 or 4 chairs. But the question that we would ask you to reflect upon, I'm only going to give you 10 minutes for the exercise because then we'll have some turnaround time on that. But to talk about, the theme of this lecture or of this workshop is hope and abundance. When have you in your life experience, through your faith communities, experienced opportunities for hope and abundance? Not only for yourself, but especially for your wider communities. Okay? Talk about that in your groups. But then the question that we'll ask is that each group identify one spokesperson to summarize your conversation.
Now, what
In
are
a larger group.
resources for hope?
Yeah, what are some resources for hope that you've been able to identify at a local level that we might then be able to identify at our corporate level here? Okay.
The follow-up with that would be, as we sit here then and in closing our time together, what are some of the, you think, opportunities out there where you are? As you think of your place, what are the opportunities? We always have to test these things, but they always start usually with an intuition or an idea that, hey, there are truckers that go past here, or there's, we were talking, while you were in group, we were talking about this little place in Clanton, Alabama that gives out rice and beans, and they started with 25 bags and now 300 a week or something in a little town, and they're not people of means themselves either. There's a very thin margin between themselves and the people that get the product, but that's what they do. We're the rice and beans church. We feed people. That's what we do. So as you think about it for yourself and your places, do you have any hunches? Do you have any sense about what those things might be? Okay.
I have a thought and a question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like what is coming up from this and what I'm getting out of it from the stories that you guys have told is for communities to just claim what they are and utilizing the needs and the resources of the community and just
Local option, yes.
exactly, right? And so instead of being annoyed that they're not like somebody else or like some other really popular church next door,
Right,
or like really, feel pathetic about themselves because they're not
Yeah.
like that,
right.
which is great. And I think that that's actually really important. So, but I'm wondering, the question is, so are we then supposed to just be happy with our sizes? Because the small church model is becoming more and more the reality?
Mhm.
Or should we try to grow bigger?
I have an answer.
I got an answer too.
My answers always involve both and.
Okay.
So, okay,
Yeah.
I'm not much of a binary thinker, but
Yeah.
I think that when congregations are fully alive, they do attract people.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
Yeah. Having said that, we're not drawing off the days where people went from 10 to 1,000 or
Yeah.
something. But they do attract people.
Yeah.
The other side of that, though, is in the process, in addition to the numbers, I would encourage places to look at what do we mean by growth and have it be multidimensional. We can grow spiritually. We can grow in our visibility in the community. We can grow in our commitment. We can grow in our faith maturity. We can grow in the number of partnerships that we're active in locally, so that the numerical growth, while not unimportant, isn't the only type of growth that people refer to. That would be mine.
I'll give a really quick answer to that as well. When I started working at the Episcopal Church Center, my predecessor, the office was in my predecessor's tenure called the Office of Congregational Development. And when I started there, I said, part of what I will do is I'll take the job if I can change the name. And because development, I think, is misunderstood both within and beyond the church. Beyond the church, outside of the church, development means fundraising. So I'm the development officer for a university. What do? I raise money, right? So people say, well, you do congregational development. Does that mean you help us raise money? Maybe, maybe not. But it's not simply about money. And internally, as in within the culture of the church, development came to be understood as bigger is better.
Yeah.
So my church development means last year I had 75 people. Next year I have 81 people. We had a successful year in church development, and that is a self-defeating experience for a lot of congregations in a lot of towns. What I said is I'll take the job if I can change the name from Congregational Development to Congregational Vitality. Well, why do you want to do that? I said, well, because I believe that growth, to answer your question, growth is a byproduct of health. It's secondary to health. Healthy congregations will grow because healthy systems grow.
It's organic.
Whether it's the system that is my body, or whether it is the system that is a university, or whether it's a system that is a congregation, healthy systems will grow. Now, sometimes they grow numerically, sometimes they grow spiritually, whatever, but they will grow. But growth is a byproduct of health. It's not the primary, it's the secondary. So when we go about the work of building healthy churches, what will happen is people will say, I want to hitch my wagon to that train. When we are congregations that are deeply involved in our local communities, when we are engaged in transformative experiences with the people around us, there will be people who will say, All Saints in Santa Barbara is doing some amazing stuff. I want to hang out there because I want to be a part of that transformative experience, not only for that community, but for myself. But growth then is secondary to health. And I think for too many years, we put our eggs in the growth basket to the detriment of the health basket. So growth at any cost. So you would make up reasons to grow. I mean, so all you need is a dynamic preacher. All you need is a great youth group. All you need is a basketball hoop in the driveway. I mean, these are what people told me over the years. And why didn't we grow? We did all the right things.
It's a recipe.
No, you didn't.
No.
Did you create a healthy community? Did you create a transformative experience? No. And you didn't grow. Well, you kind of answered your own question then. But I mean, I think for, at least for me, I think, yes, God loves us as we are, and God invites us into something bigger, both personally and corporately. Bigger, sometimes having many meanings. But would I say that is it okay to be a small church?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, does that mean God wants us to be small? That's a different question. God wants us to be healthy. We're drawing to an end here. A couple more questions.
Yeah.
Robin.
Well, just from what you just said, what really jumped out at me was you said people leave feeling listened to,
Yeah.
and you met their needs in that order. That if we don't listen, we don't know
Yeah.
the needs.
I agree.
When I'm sitting here, Rancho Santa Margarita has to be the most overchurched community on the planet. We have 6 churches on the block of our church.
Wow.
There is, I honestly think I can honestly say that there is not a local school that does not have a church meeting in the gym on Sunday mornings. But there is such a spirit of competitiveness between them. Not to mention that we are, 5 miles from one of the biggest churches in the country.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that idea of what I'm getting here is the health, not just of the size of my congregation, but maybe my community, that for us, maybe
Right.
something we need
That's
to look
true too,
at
yeah.
is how do we blur the boundary, if you will, in a
Right.
good way,
Right.
between all of these little churches that are competing, and it is a spirit of competition in Central Santa Margarita. I mean, it's not just, it's fine to say, well, we aren't competing, well, we are.
Right. Yes.
So how do we
Say it
stop
like it
that
is.
and come together? And it really resonated with me when you said listen, and then, and then meet the needs.
Right.
Because there's a reason why there's so many churches.
Right.
People's needs aren't getting, some people's needs are not
Right.
getting met
There's-
because
if there's-
they're all feeling they have to start their own church.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I would love to point something out because I just think this is striking because it came up today, and I don't meet. We had the Christian from Tom's came and spoke to our media class, and it was really interesting because he said something that I thought was really critical. He said basically, if I'm not doing whatever needs to be done for Tom's, then it's going to die. And it speaks to that issue of sustainability and missional, which Eric Law writes in his new
Yep,
book.
yep.
I'm just starting to read all about.
Sustain it, yeah.
And Jimmy Bartz talks about that all the time. You know, I want to get this place to the point where if I leave, it carries on. So I've been seeing as he just went to Chile and is able to go away. It's such a blessing for our community to be able to sustain itself without him there. But that obviously didn't happen overnight.
Right.
But I also look at Christian, and Tom's, I think he's only a year and a half old, or however old, still very young, but incredibly faithful and determined and creative and all that. But anyway, I just am thinking about sustainability and mission.
All right. Thank you. Closing comments. Gotta wrap up here. So we want to honor your time, and it's 5 after. One thing that we want to make available to you, if you don't have a copy, another incredible resource. Sheryl and one of her former colleagues at Episcopal Divinity School, Frederica Harris Thompson, wrote a book. It's been 5 or 6 years. Isn't that long?
2006, I think.
Okay, so 7 years.
It's a blur.
Yeah. Born of water, born of spirit, supporting the ministry of the baptized in small congregations. We have copies of this for you if you wish, just as a thanks for showing up kind of thing.
Yes.
I checked with her ahead of time. Cheryl's willing to put her name in it if you want to have her sign the book before you leave, okay? But,
Yeah.
yes.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Since I am in charge of a congregation, and I realize fully this is my own baggage, that I'm kind of hesitant to try to do something because I'm afraid it's going to be the wrong thing. So, and I don't have all that much time. I mean, it'd be great to, if I were just starting out in my 20s and here I'm, and sure, I'll try something and next year, hey, I'm not there. I'm pushing 60. So as a result, I need to get over that. I need to just go ahead and say, okay, let's try something different. And it might fail completely, but I'm going to learn from that experience. And that's hard for me to get.
It's hard, particularly because, we don't usually get in this business by, just telling the Commission on Ministry all our failures and what we do. But I did learn, I was reaffirmed from these people, and when you read the stuff on hope, it is, when you're talking about self-assessment, it is, the failures need to be out there as well as the successors,
Yeah, I agree.
because that, that makes it real then. That is real. We're not in denial about what didn't work, but and I think that the fear of that failure, I think it holds us back a lot,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also, we just came through, the Holy Week and Easter experience. If you look at the Jesus story, certainly not the Christ story, but the Jesus story, he was an ultimate failure.
Yeah.
He died on a cross, okay, shamed and alone. He was not a great success story. And you look at the story of the people of Israel, they were small then, they're small now. They were not a success story. But repeatedly, the message of the good news of the scriptures is that God never asks us to be successful. God only asks us to be faithful. And I think you need to remember that when we are faithful, we are aligning our actions with God's will. Success is secondary, just like growth is secondary. Sylvia, anything you want to say as the
Wrapping us with something.
Thank you to our presenters for today, and thank you all.